Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and today we're looking at Shadow of the Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. So I'm hoping, since this is the third game in the Tomb Raider Lara Croft reboot, I guess it probably is best describing it as the Tomb Raider reboot since they don't use the name Lara Croft in the titles at all. I'm hoping for a bit of a recap because I've pretty much forgotten almost everything in the second game. Like, it's fairly memorable what happened in the first game. You get trapped on an island, your boat crashes, your friend turns out to be potentially a reincarnation of a goddess or something, and then there is one big boss fight at the end of the first game. But mostly, what you're going through is a very linear experience where you are trying to get from point A to point B, and there's not really a lot of tombs in the first game. Second game has a little bit more tombs, I think, but not enough to be memorable, and you're just like in Russia. I can't even remember how you got into this like Ukrainian Russian area. There's a hallucination section where you see Baba Yaga. That was probably the most memorable scene. But then there was just a ton of grinding in the second game. Also, and it feels like it just kind of ended with a very long run and gun section, and we got further and further away from trying to engage with the bow, which was such a iconic weapon in the first game. Now there is some meta narrative, I suppose that you might call it, in Tomb Raider now, in that Crystal Dynamics has completely broken up with Square Enix. Square Enix has had lately a very bad habit of not really advertising or publishing games particularly well, and then blaming the developer of the game for the games not selling well enough for Square Enix's standards. But it basically seems like there is not enough people on the planet to buy games to make Square Enix happy. Square Enix is only really happy when it's making a Final Fantasy or Japanese centric game, and having the game sell very well, I think, in Japan. And that's kind of typical for any Japanese company overall, is that they really don't care as much about sales if the sales in their home country are low. And that seems like that's weird. So, you're introduced to the game here, that the Tomb Raider servers are currently unavailable. What does that really mean? Well, when we actually get to the main screen, you can see, first note and update here is in the bottom left. Please note that Square Enix memberships services are disabled and no longer functional in the menu system. Does that mean there's no multiplayer anymore? I'm not sure, but I can say I don't see any multiplayer prompt here. The other prompts, as far as the update notes, is you can adjust the difficulty uniquely between easy, normal, and hard for combat, exploration, and puzzles in any arrangement. So you have a combination of 9 different potential character set difficulty settings you can have. And then you have this scene that really sets your expectations, I suppose, as far as what Shadow of Tomb Raider will be, and that you have Lara Croft basically pulling a predator, covering herself in mud with a knife in her hand, and bad guys with guns trying to shoot her. And there's some kind of, looks like Aztecian staircase. The other prompt, the third prompt, is that in New Game Plus, the work you've done will carry over to the next playthrough. It includes all skills acquired, weapons, outfits, equipment, updates, and gears. I also have, when I first launched this, unlocked a couple of things because I played the previous games and because I bought the deluxe edition. We'll have to deal with that stuff later. There is some real nonsense here. As far as what's under the options. I will also mention that according to Steam, this is a 2018 game. So it's been a few years, so everything visually should look well. But they definitely were trying and perhaps wasting their efforts to integrate some silly things like Tobii eye tracker. I don't believe any other game of note ever supported the Tobii eye tracker device. There may have been 2 or 3 other games that came out just about the same time in 2018. That is a device that basically had a camera and looked at the pupils of your eyes. So if you were looking to the left, then the screen on the left would put what is on the left more in focus and kind of blur out what was on the right. Or probably a better example is if you were looking far and into the background, what would be in the background would be hopefully more in focus, and what would be in the foreground would be a little bit blurred. Or if you're looking at something in the foreground, in this example, if you're looking at Lara Croft, then the bad guys in the background who are a little bit further would be a little bit more blurry. But then the Tobii eye tracker, if you shifted your view to the guys in the background, they would become crystal clear, and then Lara Croft would become blurry. The problem with implementing any system like that is you have to implement a camera, and that is just going to be a no-go for a lot of people to potentially have a camera looking at you, even if somehow you could convince people it's not connected to the internet. That's just not worth implementing. Maybe at some point, if we get to real VR acceptance and just like every console game has a VR headset that comes with it, something like that might be implemented. We don't really need to look at key mapping, but we'll just show off what these menus look like. There's a lot of options here. I'm going to be playing with my trusty Xbox Core controller. Now, as far as graphics go, we're using DirectX 12, we're at 1080p. I use the NVIDIA GeForce Experience to adjust these settings. So we're at a quality instead of ultra performance. Let's see. We probably should go to ultra performance and run a benchmark as it's see how that works. Full screen, exclusive full screen, which can improve performance. Using my video card at 2080, which I might be, since this game was definitely designed to push graphics very hard. I might not be able to get ultra performance with a 2080. 60 Hz VSync off. A lot of options though not available to you there. Notice that high dynamic range and its associated settings are disabled. Anti-aliasing as far as DLSS is disabled. Resolution modifier or AMD Fidelity CAS is disabled as an option. Intel SESS, which I don't even know what that is disabled. Now, I assume the reason why DLSS down here is disabled because ray tracing DLSS is enabled. So it's a newer version of the technology. So let's just see what the benchmark says. We'll, I guess, apply the settings, and then we'll run the benchmark. Running the benchmark in particular would be helpful as a way of just also showing some backstory as to what happened in the 2 previous games. We're getting some loading tips before we've even started the game as this loads. So this benchmark is supposed to have a lot of people in it and a lot of ray tracing elements into it. And when this originally launched, there really wasn't enough hardware and optimization to make this benchmark work well. But we can see, I'm not controlling the camera or anything here, that we're getting well over 60 frames per second into the hundreds and 90s. There is perhaps a inconsistency as it goes up. So we were dropping down to the 80s, but if you maxed your frames out at 60 on that scene, you would be perfectly fine. Well, you should be perfectly fine. That being said, for a 2018 game, I'm not sure I really loved the way her hair was being modeled and text and displayed. And I don't know if that really has anything to do with the engine as much as I just think maybe they opted to give her a bad haircut in designing it. So, yeah. I'm definitely not seeing anything amazingly impressive 5 years later playing this game. And if anything, I think when games try to advertise themselves or try to push the graphics to the max, they often fail in other ways. I feel like the game Control also had that same problem in that they were pushing visuals and ray tracing so much that they dropped the ball in perhaps improving the gameplay mechanic of shooting guns and fighting more varied enemies. You really do only fight like the same 5 types of enemies throughout the entirety of Control, and you shoot the gun in 4 different ways. As we start to see more textures and more objects on the screen, the frame rates are dropping down now to the 80s, but not hitting 60. The line that I always draw is 60. Now, in all fairness, if you're trying for high frame rate at 120 or 144 hertz, obviously my 2080 graphics card isn't going to cut it. Running 3 different monitors. Maybe if I turned off the other 2 monitors, something would improve there. A little bit, but probably not that much. And you would need a lot more resources if you are going to try and go to like 1440p, 2K, 4K resolutions. But as a YouTuber, it doesn't really behoove me to try to go to any of those higher elements. So on Ultra Performance, we can see our CPU and GPU are perhaps in line, but there is a point where the CPU dropped a little bit. They were fairly in line until that middle frame that was being rendered. But it kind of doesn't matter because the minimum CPU frame rate was 78, with the average being 123 and the maximum being 171. The minimum GPU graphics processing unit was 101, with the average being 141 and the maximum being 351 frames. Wow, that must have just been when it faded to black for a second. And that's the danger of some of these benchmarks, where they're not super trustworthy in that they can be designed poorly. 3 seconds of complete blackness can really be a ton of frames at that point. So yeah, my Ryzen 7 3800X 8-core processor seems to do fine. 36%, I think it says. The text is a little small. My eyesight's going worse and worse, and I'm looking at a TV from 8 feet away. Now, in this case, this is also a console game, so this text should just be bigger anyways. It's funny that the GPU drops almost at the exact same spot. In the middle. Okay. So, yeah, ultra graphics, it seems like it can be. As far as gameplay options, there's an aim mode where you have to hold the left trigger, where it could be changed to toggle, which that's nice. Repeated button presses, automatically press the mashable button while holding it, would be hold. Tap requires mashable command to be repeatedly pressed. So there's a nice accessibility issue there in case you just don't want to mash the QuickTime event buttons. I'll stick with tap, but honestly I have a little bit of arthritis in my hands. It wouldn't make sense to go to hold on that. There's this weird hidden city outfit restriction. This, you can turn off the outfit restrictions in the hidden city in the post story. Deactivating this option will allow you to equip any outfit while exploring the hidden city, potentially causing narrative inconsistencies. Note that deactivating this option will only take effect on the save game when the final boss has been defeated, so it's an option that doesn't even matter until you've already beaten the main story of the game. And then there's this frame overlay to improve the spectating experience without obstructing gameplay, which I kind of wish I could see what that looks like. We may play with that later. Gamepad controls are kind of minimal. You can't you can't remap the keys particularly too much. We could get rid of rotating for crank controls, and we could do repeated stick inputs. And then just a lot of options here, which is nice to see all these options. I hope the rest of the game stands up and justifies all this. You also have this option of voiceover immersion, where characters would speak their native language with text subtitles being on, which they weren't on by default. I think I might go with that. And then subtitle colors allows you to differentiate who is speaking. You can also turn on closed captioning, which will describe other musical cues and events and environmental effects separately. Weirdly, push to talk and multiplayer is all here. Also, you can have your dynamic range. By default it was low, but I'm going to go with high, and hopefully that'll be the right choice. But you can also have multiplayer use a Epic launcher to do crossplay. All that being said, I think they've probably just removed multiplayer from the options, unless you have to start a new game before you can do multiplayer, or it's under the challenge tombs. Well, I'm going to call this episode 0 and end this here, and we'll start quicker next time and begin the game and just hop in there. That's going to be it for this recording. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.